Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Judith Center. I know some of you are here for the walkthrough and some of you are just arriving. My name is Catherine Andrews. I'm an artist and I am the founder and the director of the Judith Center. And I'm especially excited to welcome you tonight, not only because we have an incredible exhibition we've produced in collaboration with Just Detention International, but also because this is our first panel event here on site, and all of you are guinea pigs, and it looks like it's working out so far. So thank you so much for being with us. I would like to just tell you about the Judith Center for a quick moment. In my own field, in the arts, I noticed there's, excuse my language, well, no, I won't. This is a nice crowd. There's a ton of sexism. It permeates our field. Working as an artist for many years, I experienced this and witnessed it across the experiences of many of my colleagues. I was thinking, what could we do to make change? And as I looked about, I thought, well, in the US, sexism is such a deeply entrenched structural problem. And it is nearly impossible to create change when it exists all around you. And how it exists here impacts how it shifts here. So I decided to found this organization to look at the nature of structural sexism, to identify it, and to explore how it works. We're particularly excited to partner with JDI this evening. And this panel is going to focus on, in particular, how sexism works within the system of incarceration, with a particular focus on sexual abuse for folks who are incarcerated. Though you may have heard a lot of the works on view are by incarcerated people who may not have experienced sexual trauma, but who have experienced all kinds of trauma in their life, and many of them different forms behind bars. Just a few other words: we produce exhibitions, we do panel talks, we have a book club if you're interested in reading books and learning more about the history of sexism and sort of its contemporary thought around that now. We have a poetry workshop series, we have a lending library, and we do many of our programs with institutions across the US, not just in our humble space here. So with that, I'm thrilled to have you, and I will turn the mic over to Linda McFarlane, the Executive Director of Just Detention International, who will be telling us about the panel and the wonderful conversation we'll be having.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. I really want to shout out again to Catherine and the Judith Center for their amazing work, for making this possible, for being incredibly generous with their time and space to pull this special evening together. So thank you. I also want to thank all of you for being here on a sort of warmish now Saturday evening. I know it wasn't, and also with the World Cup traffic, right? Not so easy to get here necessarily. But thank you for coming. Many of you know Just Detention International is a health and human rights organization that works to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. We were founded over 40 years ago by a survivor of prisoner rape, and we continue to be the only organization in the world dedicated exclusively to eradicating this kind of violence. And unfortunately, sexual abuse in detention is rampant in U.S. prisons and jails. Every year, over 200,000 adults and children are sexually abused in our government's custody. And that's U.S., again, prisons and jails. That's not immigration facilities. So that is sort of the tip of the iceberg, we could say. And about half of that abuse is committed by staff in adult facilities, and about 80% of that abuse is committed by staff in youth facilities. As Catherine mentioned, not every one of the panelists here, and many folks here have served time, experience sexual abuse, and not every one of the artists experience abuse. But sexual abuse it's on the continuum. It's a continuation of the dehumanization of incarceration, the sort of the daily, the degradation, the isolation, the harassment, the deprivation that's really just a part of the fabric of everyday prison life. And it touches everyone, right? It touches the families, the communities. There's family members and community members here as well who can speak to that, that people leave behind when they're incarcerated, and then who they almost all return to. And so JDI we work on many levels to address that trauma. We work to fight for laws and policies to keep people safer. We do healing and leadership programs for incarcerated people. And we also work to change the culture. We work with staff and incarcerated people to combat the harmful culture that hurts everybody involved and that allows the sort of environment and the culture where sexual abuse can flourish to continue. And I want to be clear, JDI's position is and always has been that we can end this. It is preventable. It does not have to happen. We don't have to accept it. And every person who's in detention anywhere deserves dignity and safety. Where you lay your head at night, where your pillow is, should not define whether or not you have the right to human rights. And our work is making a difference, right? We do see a difference. But as I mentioned earlier, we need folks' help. We need all of your help. We rely on gifts from people like you to keep all of our work going, to keep going inside prisons and offering these programs, to push for laws and policies at the federal level and in states as well. And so just to note that both here and at the merchandise table, there is a QR code. You can go ahead and scan that to donate to JDI. Please do so. And your gifts will help us to continue the work. I want to highlight that you saw Johanna's art there earlier. Also, another of our former colleague and artist is here tonight, Leyva. I don't know if Leyva's willing to give a wave, who created that beautiful pastel piece on charcoal colored paper. And Leyva's art is also on a magnet. So both Johanna and Leyva's arts are in magnets across the hall that you can purchase. So I want to thank very much all of you who are already part of our movement. I know many familiar faces here and familiar names. I've joked with several people that I send you emails all the time and read your name all the time, but we haven't met in person, so that's been lovely. But for those of you who are learning about us for the first time, I really do hope that you'll join us. And I am now very pleased and honored to introduce our moderator, Esther Lim, who's a member of JDI's board, but also a long time friend and colleague to me and to JDI. Esther's a social worker. I'm going to say that first because, workers got to stick together. But Esther is also an expert in criminal legal system reform, oversight. She's a long-time fierce advocate and tireless advocate for human rights of incarcerated people. She's worked in everything from government oversight to state prison oversight to legal advocacy organizations, educational institutions. I'll stop there, but I'm very honored to pass it to her to introduce the panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you to Catherine for hosting this event and this amazing art exhibition. It really does mean so much that these beautiful pieces are being shown in a professional art space run by the Judith Center, a nonprofit whose mission is aligned with JDI's in the fight for an end to gender-based violence. I'm honored to be moderating our panel today, Trauma by Design, the Culture of Abuse Inside Prisons. And we'll be talking about life in prison, the conditions that lead to gender-based violence and other forms of trauma, along with how programs like JDI's art workshops can support healing behind bars. Unfortunately, Don Davidson, a retired California prison warden and the current chair of the board of directors, was unable to make it today, which is why we have Linda, which I think is amazing, our executive director of JDI, who has decades of experience working with incarcerated people and those who are survivors of gender violence, who'll be sitting in for her. Also joining us, we have Johanna Mills, a member of JDI Survival Council and a JDI program associate. We have Martin Leyva, professor of sociology at El Camino College and also a board member at Just Detention International. And we have Jessica Solis, a life coach at Anti-Recidivism Coalition and a program manager with California Families Against Solitary Confinement. Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge that trauma can be a difficult topic to discuss. We'll be talking about acts of violence and abuse in detention facilities and the effects on people. We understand if attendees need to step away from tonight's dialogue if needed. But I want to add, we will also give you a reason to be hopeful by showing you how it is possible to bring support and healing to incarcerated people. There have been so many successes in JDI's work to ensure the safety and dignity of people behind bars. And that's because of inspiring advocacy of people like our panelists here today and the support of you all, so thank you. But it's also important that we name what's happening, the abuse, deprivation, isolation, and everyday humiliation that goes on in our prisons and jails. To talk about the everyday aspects of incarceration, I want to turn first to Jessica. You were formerly incarcerated in a California prison, and today you help many people working to rebuild their lives after incarceration. Based on what you witnessed today, yourself, and what you know from others, can you talk about how incarceration itself is a traumatic experience, and what are some ways that incarcerated people are traumatized during their everyday lives?
So, hi, I'm Jessica. I wrote some stuff down because I'm a little nervous. So, throughout the 17 years I spent incarcerated, I witnessed abuse daily. I was 25 years old when I went to prison. Sorry. Okay, some male staff would comment on our bodies. When you asked for essential needs, you would receive a response like, "What would you be willing to do for it?" At times, they would reach towards their private parts. This kind of behavior became our everyday life. One incident really affected me mentally. I was housed in solitary confinement where we depend on staff for everything down to toilet paper and food. We have 2 hours yard time, once a week, 10-minute showers 3 times per week. I was in a cell with my roommate who became my friend. We both did not have financial support, and being confined in that cell for almost 22 hours a day, we had no access to extra food. The staff knew who did not receive canteen or commissary. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. The food we received through a tray slot was not enough to take away our hunger pains. Okay. We can literally hear our stomachs growling. One day we asked the male staff for extra lunch. The staff wanted us to lift our shirts and was dangling the food in the window, saying, "Let's see how hungry we really are." I remember us looking at each other, and at first we kept saying, "No, it's okay. We would rather starve." But our stomach literally ached in pain. My roommate said, "I'll do it," and I didn't stop her. And that's something I will always live with. We did this for a bologna sandwich. After we ate, we just looked at each other and sat in silence for hours. Eventually, this became a daily ritual, and we became desensitized. We started laughing it off, making jokes about it. But our eyes told a different story when we would look at each other. And we were bonded by trauma. The officer used our hunger to abuse us, and we carried that shame. We would be handcuffed whenever leaving our cell and escorted to the shower. The bottom of the shower was covered, but the top part had bars where you could see us naked. We had male staff in the bubble, and they could see directly into the shower. I would try to remove my clothing and cover the bars with them as fast as I could. I would feel the correctional officer in the bubble's eyes burning into me. Thank you. Sometimes they wouldn't even try to hide the fact that they were staring. I felt dehumanized, humiliated, and ashamed. I'm going to answer the questions.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think you could tell that this is still something that impacts even after years of post-incarceration. So, Jessica, I just want to say thank you for your bravery and your courage. And I do want to say that you are in a safe space where people believe you. We'll move on to Johanna. you were sexually assaulted while serving time in prison by your work supervisor. You shared your experience publicly in the media, in op-eds you've written, in testimony on Capitol Hill, and even through your artwork, as displayed here at today's exhibition. You also reported the sexual assault while you were still in prison right after it happened. Can you talk about what happened when you reported the assault to staff? What was the reaction? How were you treated?
Yes, I can. You know, it's interesting. I never knew that you weren't supposed to report those things. In my mind, I was trying to get to a safe place because he lured me. He was my work supervisor. And he lured me to a catwalk under the pretense of fixing some wiring. And I couldn't see what he was pointing at, so I stepped in front of him and he hit me in the back of the head and knocked me down onto the floor. We were in a gymnasium that had been closed and used for women who had been in a prison that was flooded. So there was 200 beds in there and it was closed down to general population. I just remember thinking, because he left me there and I was in an out of bounds area. And I just remember thinking, number one, where was he? I didn't know what he may do next. Number two, how was I going to get back to a place because I was in an out of bounds area and I had given my ID to the sergeant at one of the yard gates at CCWF. And I didn't live on that yard, so I had to explain in the middle of trauma what I was doing on the main yard when it was closed. So I was terrified to do it. I didn't know what to say. So I made it through that gate with a pat down, which was the last thing on earth that I wanted, and got back through work change, which is a place behind where the housing units are. It's like a, I don't know, it's an area where the school is and where the dining, where the kitchen is, and different jobs. So my first thing was I have to get to the teacher before the school closed. So I went into the school and I found a teacher that I'd had a class with and I thought, he's going to help me. And I was wrong. He didn't want any part of helping me and I couldn't understand that. So I asked him, would he call S&E, which is security and escort, because I knew if I could just get to somewhere and tell somebody, they'd put me in a safe place. He wouldn't do it. He didn't want any part of being involved with a sexual assault. So I asked him if he would do it if he thought I had drugs. And he said, yes, I'll do that. So we were allowed to bring coffee through the work change to our job in the back for what we were going to use for the day. I still had that in my pocket, so I threw it on his desk. And he called security and escort. Well, I didn't know anything about what they did with drugs because I wasn't involved in drugs. But they came and they field tested it, and they knew it wasn't drugs, and so they were angry. So they took me into the bathroom and stripped me out and made me bend over, squat, and cough, spread my cheeks like 10 times after an assault. They were women. And I couldn't understand that to save my life. So finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I said, okay. I was sexually assaulted, and I want to go to segregation, because in my mind, segregation was a safe place, but it wasn't. And so eventually they took me to the sergeant's office and they put me in a man-sized cage. And I sat there and sat there and sat there until yard call. And yard call, all of the inmates come through the sergeant's office to go through to yard. They told everybody who came through there that I was a rat for telling on somebody. And they threw hot coffee on me, they spit on me, they called me names, they threw urine on me, they did all kinds of things at that gate. Because not only did they go through the gate, but they came back through it. So it was somewhere around midnight that I finally got to talk to another sergeant who took me to an office, who tried to get me to say that another inmate had done this to me. And I wouldn't do it. So he finally took me to segregation. It was maybe the next day, maybe the day after that, I was taken to ISU, which is Investigative Services Unit, in the middle of the day when everybody's out, so everybody sees you being escorted to a place where they know that you're reporting something. So I went there to report what happened to me. And it was a female captain, and I was so happy it was a female captain. I just knew she would be understanding and help me and put me in a safe place. And she was vicious. And it was something that they pulled me out and brought me to her 2 or 3 times a day sometimes to get me to drop this case. In segregation, they starved me for 4 days in a row. They would pass my cell with a tray and write down that I had refused it. So I know what starvation feels like, and it's awful. And they put me in an area of segregation where they held the mental health people who were not capable of being a witness for me. And so when I went to the shower, they would turn on the shower, I would soap up, and they would turn it off and leave me in the shower all night long. They were trying everything they possibly could to get me to stop this investigation. And it just infuriated me. And every time I hear a story like yours, it infuriates me. So I dug my heels in, and the captain of my yard kept coming to my cell saying, "I'm going to handcuff you and drag you back to this yard." And there came a point where I said, "Come on in." I lost my mind in there. In the beds in segregation where I was at, there was a space. I was so skinny. There was a space from the top of the bunk, because it's cement. It's a cement block that you're sleeping on. And there's a space between the top and the bottom. I was so afraid to go to sleep and wake up, unprotected, that I shoved my body into that space and my head hung out to sleep. So eventually, JDI, I got a pamphlet from an attorney that was about JDI, and on the back of that pamphlet was the IG's address. And I wrote to the IG in Sacramento, and they sent 2 women down to investigate. Well, they investigated the investigators, and I was sent out of state. It wasn't long after that I was sent back. Well, it was long after that. It was almost 15 years. I spent most of my time in Nevada. But it was probably the best thing that happened to me, because I got to reinvent, take classes, paint. I'm a self-taught artist, and what you see there is all of the pieces of emotion that I pour into those paintings that I can't really tell other people, because once you tell somebody those pieces of pain, because the pain is in the details, then they have to carry that, and I never wanted that for anybody. And so I came back to CIW. JDI was there to receive me within 24 hours. They were in segregation, asking me if I was okay. Vanessa came in, and I was able to, once I was out of segregation, I was able to take classes, or not classes with her, but one-on-ones. And she basically was my finisher. She told me everything that I was doing and everything that I did was right, and it was good, and it was going to serve me well, and it does. And I love her very, very much. And so that is my reporting story, and it was absolutely awful, about a serial rapist who was allowed to work inside of an institution with women. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Johanna. Johanna, thank you as well for sharing your story and also your bravery and courage. Martin, I'm going to go to you next and ask about men's prisons. Can you talk about the role that gender and specifically expectations around masculinity have in shaping the culture in men's prisons?
Yeah. Can y'all hear me? First of all, I just want to say, Jessica and Johanna, thank you for sharing. And my work now focuses on dismantling this. And if I cuss, I apologize up front. Sometimes it evokes an emotion, needs to be out there. But I vow to dismantle this hyper-patriarchal masculine society we live in that causes this harm. But first of all, to your question too, I just want to note that there's nothing wrong with masculinity, right? That masculinity is not a bad thing. It's volatile and hyper masculinity that is the thing that is the most dangerous. And I spent years inside of a prison cell living up to my hyper volatile masculinity. I think that we need to address trauma from the gate. I share this story because I often go back to this place where I want to find the roots of my harm that I caused. And I share this story because it's a very important story about trauma. But I remember being roughly about 8 or 9 years old, living in a gang neighborhood, being raised in a gang family, knowing that this was my only. I mean, we learn through observation, and this is my only observation that created this person that I became. But I remember being about 8 or 9 years old, and I'm in my neighborhood, and I've always been a very sensitive kid and a sensitive person. Even now, listening to the two of you share, I'm very sensitive to this stuff. And I was in my neighborhood one day, and I got in an argument with another kid from my neighborhood, and I got in a fight, and I got beat up. And I went home to my mom, a single mother, alcoholic, and I walked in the house, and I was crying. I'm a sensitive kid. And all I wanted was a hug. She said, what happened? Told her I got beat up in the neighborhood, this kid. And excuse my language, but she said, don't be a bitch and go outside and take care of it. And I went outside and I got beat up again. But I hold on to that story because at that point, next time something bad happened, I didn't reach out to my mom. I reached out to the other men and boys in my neighborhood who protected me because I didn't have protection other places. And that created a very hostile and volatile young boy that turned into a man who eventually ended up in prison and never stood up for the harm that I knew that was happening. Now, I think that the role of gender, especially in prison, understanding that in prison I knew harm was happening, and I've always been sensitive to it, but I was always too afraid because of the hostility and the volatile nature environment of that place to actually take a stand in there. And it's really when you walk into this space where, and I'm just one person, the prison system is full of people who actually hold on to stories like mine. So when you place us all into this one place, we're gonna find a way to survive. If that means causing harm, that means stopping harm, that means only protecting myself and the very few people that I can trust, I'm gonna do what I have to do. And so we create this space of nothing but harm and trauma that takes years. And I've been out of prison 16 years now, and I'm still working on that trauma from the harm that I've allowed to happen. Right. This is why I think as a college professor, doing this work, working with people, working with JDI and other organizations to address hyper toxic and volatile masculinity and the nature and the harm of the most dangerous thing we have in our society, which is patriarchy. We can have that conversation later if you like. Patriarchy is extremely dangerous to our society. It allows for this type of behavior to happen. And I don't want to downgrade anybody, but I learned at a very young age in juvenile detention facilities that the weak do not survive. And I will cause harm in order to protect myself. And when a young person learns that and then eventually ends up in the prison system, other people become less than, because I'm going to survive this place. And it's taken years and years to create a new me. Or actually not create a new me, figure out who I was and who I am, right? And that's the important work, because again, if we do not address that hyper volatile masculinity, this type of stuff happens in all facilities. And it's really tough because, I work with a lot of formerly incarcerated peoples, of all gender, queer folks, trans folks, and the stories is a thing that really kind of like, what is my fault in it, and how can I do better every single day to change this? It's very, very tough work. Very tough work.
Thank you so much, Martin, for your experience and sharing that. I want to bring in Linda now to talk about trauma before incarceration. It's such a critical factor in the lives of people behind bars. I'm thinking about how trauma creates a pathway for women to be incarcerated, what many in the field sometimes call the trauma to prison pipeline. So Linda, can you talk about the people who are in women's prisons? What were their experience with trauma before they were incarcerated, and how do those experiences affect their lives inside?
Yeah, thank you, Esther. And I think we know that depending on what study you look at, 80 to 95% of women who are incarcerated experience some kind of sexual abuse or intimate partner violence, right? So there's that. So everyone inside these facilities is already traumatized. And you heard Martine talk about the trauma that also led to incarceration. And so I think, again, this is part of the sort of misogyny, sexism, patriarchy, too, that you were talking about, is that even though the system consistently harms women in such specific ways, we don't talk about it as much when it comes to men, and that leads us not to ever getting to the root of the issue, right? But I think when you look at the population of women's prisons, many of them, over half, are mothers, right? Many of them are people who, again, experience sexual abuse, domestic violence. Many of them most women who are incarcerated are in for what you call survival crimes. Those are in for what you call violent crimes. Very often, they're in for crimes behind an abusive relationship that they were in, right? So somebody who was forced to be the driver in a robbery that the person who was abusing them was committing, or where they harmed in some way the partner who had been sexually assaulting them for years, right? And then they're in for fighting back, right? That is what happens. And sort of poverty, addiction, mental illness, disability, all of the things that harm women through sexism broadly in society lead to situations where women who come in are already traumatized when they're in. And again, like Martine said, the rates of sexual abuse perhaps aren't as high for men who are incarcerated, but the rates of what they call adverse childhood experiences certainly are astronomical as well.
Thank you for that, Linda. So it's clear from what we heard that people who are incarcerated often traumatized before they are locked up, and then face yet more trauma once they're behind bars. So now I want to pivot and bring in something more hopeful. There are so many innovative programs that are supporting incarcerated people in their healing. Linda, I'd like to come back to you, since you've been such a pioneer in terms of delivering services to people who are incarcerated, and you've been really a champion of gender-responsive and trauma-informed programming. Can you walk us through what that means, describe some of the programming that you've set up through JDI?
Sure. And I think one thing I do want to say, too, is that going back to what Martine's comments as well, that and my colleague Dawn, who was not able to be here, what she would say is that things that work inside men's prisons don't necessarily work inside women's prisons, right? And that's often been the model, right? Because the majority of people who are incarcerated are men, that the systems, the programs, the ways of doing things are set up for men and then sort of laid over, slapped onto facilities that are designated primarily for women. However, again, because men are human beings who need support, communication, and connection as well, what works inside women's prisons does in fact work inside men's prisons. And we saw that with our art workshops, right? When we began our art workshops, we did begin them first in women's prisons at the California Institution for Women. And pretty soon we thought we want to do these in men's programs too. And it worked, and it gave men a space to tap into that sensitivity and humanity in a different way. And so it's interesting, often when you, whoops, maybe John, when you look at what's described as gender responsive programming, what gender responsive programming means is taking that past trauma into account, taking the trauma that people live with on a daily basis into account, taking the need for communication and connection into account, providing spaces where people can feel safe and where people can learn coping skills and communication skills. And we talk about gender responsive and trauma informed. These are both kind of buzzwords in the corrections field, and they're the same, right? When you look at what trauma informed is, it's the same as what gender responsive is. And so when we first started going into prisons back in 2005 and beginning to offer our first programs, it was to bring rape crisis counseling of the same quality and standard that people can get into the community into California prisons. And that was absolutely unheard of at the time. And we were told we were nuts and that could not possibly happen. Luckily, we had connection with a couple of wardens in California Department of Corrections who were willing to try something that was kind of out there at the time. And, you know, what we saw immediately was that providing that space where people could be seen as a person, where people could not be the number that they're hanging on their ID badge, but be a human being, just that space in its own was transformative. And I think that's the core of gender responsive programming.
Thank you for that, Linda, for centering the humanity in the programs that JDI delivers. And I should add that we do have one of the people who can speak to the impact of this programs is Johanna. Johanna, you were transferred back to California Institute for Women a few years prior to release, but the prison had changed, and in large part because of Dawn, who isn't here, former warden, because of her leadership, and I would say her courage to bring that type of programming into an institution. And you received trauma-informed programming. Can you talk about those services that you received?
Yes, I can talk about them. I had programming with Vanessa. It's the first time I was ever able to trust anybody inside of an institution to be able to talk about the pain and the things that I went through, and somebody telling me, I believe you. And you really can't do that in other institutions because they write down things on in your file, and if you go before a board, you won't get out. So Vanessa was able to work in such a way that made me feel safe inside of the institution, and we sometimes had battles with them canceling our appointments, telling me she wasn't there, and here she'd come out and go, hey, and I go, he just told me you weren't here. You know, so there was hurdles and things like that, but we did it, and she was very, you know, just kept right on going through all the hoops that the Department of Corrections puts you through when you're trying to help people, which they knew that she was. And it was amazing. It really was. And Dawn Davidson, I really wish she was here because she's a real gift. I think it's the first time it's almost unheard of to just love your warden inside of a prison. But we all loved her, and we all cried when she retired. It was like, no, don't do this. You know, she was the mother, the sister, the person that we all needed her to be while maintaining her place as a warden with such grace and respect, and she was very important to us. So we really miss her there, and they still do. They still talk about her, and because I have friends that are still there. And so, yes, it was incredible.
Thank you so much for that, Johanna. And then Jessica, one thing that strikes me as being important to discuss is how the trauma of incarceration, it actually doesn't end at the prison gate. It follows through, and I think even today, as evident, a lot of y'all have been released after many, many years, and yet just talking about the trauma, it's almost like as if it just happened again. So for formerly incarcerated people, that trauma can really shape their lives after incarceration. So can you tell us a bit about the effects of trauma on people who have been released, and most especially the kind of work that ARC or Anti-Recidivism Coalition does to help people reintegrate back into community?
Yes. Yeah, because I usually don't cry so much. But when I do bring up the story, it does affect me, and I've been home since 2019. So I witnessed the members coming in, and they're fresh out of prison. So anxiety is the top. PTSD, anxiety. So at ARC, we create a safe space for them. So they have life coaches, right? We talk to them and we get to the root problem, because that's where we find out where the trauma is. So we talk to them, we give them that. I believe us being formerly incarcerated, the majority of our staff is formerly incarcerated. And so when they come, they're a little standoffish when you first meet them, and then you share that part of it, and just, we recognize it. I recognize it. I recognize the being institutionalized. I could see them having a panic attack as I'm just asking them basic information. You're guiding them to start their whole life over. They've been gone sometimes decades, and they get nervous when they pick up that phone, right? They look, they don't know how to do emails. So it's all about patience and compassion, empathy. We know what they are going through, so we try to support them as best possible. We also have so many self-help groups for them to attend. We also have career readiness workshops, financial literacy, digital literacy, and for the women, it's a little different, like you said, right? So the women, it's hard to get them to be around the men at times. So we created women's programming. And so with the women's programming, we have separate monthly support meetings for them until they're comfortable enough to be around the other members. We keep that as a safe place for them, and we show them basic skills of self-care. A lot of women don't know how to put on makeup as myself. I still wear the same eyeliner I did since I was like 12. But I don't know about the contour and all that. So we have that safe space for them, like teaching us about makeup, and just like those special moments that we don't have when we're inside. And we become sisters there. Like all of us like are the strongest support system at ARC. We try to create that for them, and we have tons of monthly support meetings, handball tournaments, ice skating events, and it's all just to teach them community, because the majority of the people who come home do not have a support system, especially the ones that have been gone for so long. Some of their family members are gone, they're deceased, they don't have that. The mothers and fathers as well are trying to reunify with their children. The reunification is a big thing. And you can't tell your children what you've been through. They will never understand. You would never want that trauma put on your children. But so they just think you just left them, not understanding that we had trauma growing up. That affects us, but they just wanted their parents. A lot of the members go through a lot, but we're a strong support system for them. And I'm so honored to work there and just give them hope. So you could see, like, just for them to get their first job is like the greatest feeling in the world, because it's just us trying to make them, help them succeed. And I needed that. So, and I didn't have a support system either when I came home. So I like grasped like I was reaching for straws, right? Just to try to not go back to that place or not just give up. So the coalitions are the best way to, any coalition that helps formerly incarcerated is amazing.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, we talked about folks being bonded by trauma while incarcerated, and on the outside, in many ways, you're bonded through healing and restoration, through kind of that peer-to-peer experience, right? There's only so much that we as folks who are not incarcerated can give, but when it's something different, when it's like, I know what you experienced because I experienced that too, so thank you for sharing. Martina, I want to go to you. I know that you've worked extensively with people who've been released from prisons, particularly with formerly incarcerated students. Can you talk about the kinds of challenges they face and what you found to be helpful for them?
Yeah. When you leave a prison and then you try to go to school, a lot of that trauma and anxiety and fear comes popping back up, because school can kind of suck sometimes, right? And it can be a very difficult place to navigate, especially if you have never navigated it before in a healthy way. So a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of doubt. I mean, we have these. I'm a college professor now, and I still have a concrete block in my head that when I feel like I'm not doing something to the best of my ability, all of a sudden, the voice of my stepfather and my mother is like, oh, you're dumb, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're a fraud. And I have to remind myself that those things pop up only in the spaces that I really want to be in. And so that's what we see, that's what I see when I'm working with students. But I think one of the most important things, one, trauma-informed care with individuals coming out of prison and into college. Secondly, being extremely critical about the system and society as a whole, because as much as I love reentry programs, it's not just our jobs to change, it's our jobs to change the system, because you're asking me to re-enter back into a society that pushed me away in the first place, right? And that didn't really accept me. And so when I work with formerly incarcerated students, how can we become advocates? How can we become organizers and activists to change the system that we live in for that next generation? Because I do a lot of work in continuation high school and a lot of work with gang members, not gangs, just gang members, two different things. Because I want to let them know that it's not their fault. They're accountable to the things they do, but there's an entire system, an umbrella literally that sits above us that doesn't provide the right resources, the right care, I have learning disabilities, and so it never provided me the right ways to learn, right? And so when I have doubt, I create harm. And so working with individuals coming home from prison, I have to address all these things because it's a holistic care. My number one thing is just dismantle that patriarchy, that idea of, that story I shared of me as a little kid. What that did is it created this lost kid inside of me. And I find that with a lot of the men, not just the men, but a lot of the formerly incarcerated peoples, we have these broken, hurt little kids living inside of us, and I want to get to that human being. And when we get to that human being, that's when the tears come out, because the tears are super important. I almost feel like I'm gonna cry right now, which is okay if I do. But it's like one of these things where we have to heal that little person because that little person still lives with us. And then in these programming with these, whether they're young people or adults in school, we have to get to that place where we can really heal, understand, and also create change. So I love what I do. So.
Martine, thank you for being such an advocate for your students as well. And I love the idea of being seen. And I think so much of this artwork is about asking to be seen outside of why they're in. That actually concludes kind of this piece. And we would love to throw it out to you all. So if you have any questions about any of our panelists, I think you could just raise your hand and someone will circulate a mic. Do folks have any questions, or do we answer everything right here?
This question is for Johanna. So what was the process of teaching yourself art? How did you even teach yourself art?
That's a really good question, because sometimes I feel like I have imposter syndrome. I knew that I needed a challenge. It was in 2010 when I started to paint, and I needed a challenge because I didn't have anybody that I could process the stuff I'd gone through, the things that I held inside, and so I needed to do something with that. And so I decided I'd put it on canvas and see what it looked like. And there's many of my paintings in the beginning that have many paintings underneath the finished one. And so that's what prompted me to start doing that, because I needed to get it out. And so when I paint, it's usually from emotion. Thank you for asking.
This one's for Martin. I'm a teacher, and I heard you mention how, like as you were younger, you had learning disabilities, and it would have been helpful if you had different ways of learning. So as a professor, like what do you do, or what advice do you have for me as a teacher, which would help students in the future, I guess?
It's interesting because having learning disabilities and then becoming a professor and then working with people who possibly have learning disabilities, because we don't ask. I teach in different modalities. I'm a storyteller, and so when I teach sociology. So when I teach sociology, I'm always using visuals and a lot of stories to create an image in students' minds. Now, I know some students that have the inability to actually see an image in their head, which is weird for me, but I always try to connect theory and frameworks and concepts always with storytelling and different modalities for them to learn. And never let them leave without asking questions, because I'm a visual kind of kinesthetic person. If you just let me read something, I won't absorb it. I have to absorb it in different ways. And so I always have different ways to teach people. And it's not just in the classroom, but it's when I'm running men's groups or working with high school students. I work with continuation high school students, so they already got one foot in the juvenile justice system. And so I use all these modalities, and they love stories because then they can tell stories in their own way, and it helps them remember everything we're talking about, right? So that's one way. I don't know if that, hopefully that was helpful.
And I think we had a question. My name is Lara Stemple. I'm former employee of Just Detention International, so I'm really long time ago. Thank you. Not necessary, but thank you. I'm so proud to see everything that all of you are doing. I'm so grateful to you all. So my question is for anyone who wants to answer. I just wanted to hear more about where the movement is vis-a-vis solitary confinement or isolation or the SHU. You know, of course, it's what is turned to often when someone who's been victimized steps forward. Oh, we'll isolate you, we'll make you safe. And of course, that's far from the reality, both physically, psychologically, in all kinds of ways. So has there been much acceptance on the pushback to that as the default next step? Like in the system itself, is there acknowledgement that this needs to be different now? And then what are the alternatives that people are using, if any?
So I'm also an advocate with Mandela Campaign and California Families Against Solitary Confinement. So that's what we're pushing with Mandela, because a lot of people are placed in solitary confinement during investigations. If you're assaulted by staff, you are supposed to be the victim, but they place you in solitary confinement. And while you're confined, it's harsh. It's torture. So we go and advocate. I've been, I'm also a solitary confinement survivor. So I was placed in solitary confinement for the first time at 13 years old. And I was at Los Padrinos in the box. So I was part of the gladiator fights. Now, back in 1991. So this is something that's been going on for decades, and a lot of people are placed in solitary confinement for a drawing. So that's why yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Could you guys hear me? Yeah. So that's why I'm a staunch advocate to end solitary confinement. We're spread awareness because we have the RHU regulations now. They're changing the wording. So it's still solitary confinement, but they're finding ways to change it. But they're still placing you in and acting like they're not. So it's a long fight. The Governor Newsom didn't want to deal with it last year. So this year we're making it an informational campaign. And actually ARC and Mandela are getting together on June 25th. We're having a zine workshop, which these zines we're teaching everybody, showing them how to fold up these zines. These zines have a picture of a solitary confinement survivor and their poetry and their writing. These are going to be displayed July 25th and July 26th. July 25th in Oakland, July 26th in Cafe Smalls in LA. And all of the stories, I'm the only female that is home out of that book. There's about 20 other women that are still incarcerated that are solitary confinement survivors. They're in the book, and we also have, we're doing this in remembrance of the hunger strike. So a lot of the other people that are speaking and that are part of California family, California, whatever, CFATs, right? They were also participants in the hunger strike, and they were featured in the strike film. So we're trying to make these changes, but they're still doing it.
I just wanted to say one thing. You have written me many letters, And I've written you many letters, and your name still rings very loudly in my heart. Thank you.
So we're just going to conclude with our Q&A, but I just want to give just a huge thank you to our panelists. And we would not be here without the graciousness of the Judith Center. To Catherine and her amazing staff, thank you so much. I also want to thank the Anti-Recidivism Coalition for supporting this event and for their amazing leadership in helping formerly incarcerated people. I see Norma over there and obviously Jessica, so thank you. Oh, and Bob, thank you. And thank you to the Just Detention International for putting this event together and all the amazing staff. The staff, can we just raise your hand? You all set this up, so thank you. And Samson.
Thank you,
Samson. And if you want to learn more about the work of Judith Center or Just Detention International and ARC, please grab their literature. It's over by the table along with merch. Make sure you get your merch. Or talk to any of the staff who are here. And lastly, please check out the amazing art. This actually will be here until November. So please bring your family, your friends, come often, take a look at the art. And now I will hand it back to our amazing leader, Executive Director, Linda.
Thank you. And it's open till November 21st. We will probably have we'll have other events between now and then. But if you want to bring someone back, if you're interested, it's actually going to be available by appointment. So reach out to the Judith Center or to JDI about that. And so for now, I would just invite folks to spend some more time with the art. There's also 3 floors of art open houses that are open until 8. So feel free to wander around as well. And again, we're going to be here. Catherine, the Executive Director of Judith Center, is here. Other staff from ARC, Rob and Norma, are here. And obviously anyone with the orange lanyards, if you have questions or comments, would like to connect with any of those 3 organizations, please talk to us and have a lovely evening. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
And don't forget to donate. I'll do that as a board. I feel like it's my board's role. Please, we encourage, find a QR code, buy some merch. We do this work through your donations. So please be gracious with your donations. Thank you.